Okay, so thank you very much to the select audience for coming to what I hope will be, I don't know, interesting somewhat. So I'll start with a disclaimer and an anecdote. First of all, the disclaimer is that I was asked to contribute to this series, and because I figured it's a useful thing to reflect on spiritual matters, I agreed to give a little talk. But the disclaimer is that I actually have no formal qualification in this area whatsoever, unlike some of the other speakers who've spoken in this series. So what you get is simply some more or less coherent reflections by a fellow human being. And now we get to the anecdote, and then we can get serious. So the anecdote is that imagine that once upon a time I tried to teach my cat how to calculate square roots. So, you know, the square root of 4 is 2 because 2 by 2 is 4, and the square root of 9 is 3 because 3 by 3 is 9, and so on. And yeah, so I tried very hard, and to cut a long story short, basically I failed. And what ended up happening, I think, is that basically the cognitive capacity of my cat just wasn't up to the task I was trying to challenge it with. It basically just didn't really understand the concept that I was trying to convey. So I've often felt that humanity, in a sense, and probably forever, has been just like I depicted in this little anecdote with the cat. In a way, we want to be able to answer questions about why we live, what life is, what happens when it ends, and so on. And we're really very much almost fatally attracted to questions about infinity, infinite space, infinite time. And these kinds of things somehow are really exciting to us, and we really want to know the answers to them. But my thesis here today is that we're basically just smart enough to pose these questions in a somewhat coherent manner, but in a way perhaps nowhere near smart enough to actually find definitive answers to them. In a way, just like my cat did not really understand the concept of square roots, even though I did a really good job at explaining it, I would argue that most of the deeper questions that we ask about life are actually beyond our cognitive capacity to answer. So if that's the case, that's my thesis for today, then what do we do? Well, there are various things we can do. One thing we can do is follow religious teachings of one variety or another. And alternatively, and I would argue not mutually exclusively, we can also maybe settle into a state of what I'd call humble ignorance and wonder. So when I say that so I think these two options are not actually mutually exclusive. So when I say they're not mutually exclusive, what I mean is that it is possible to practice a particular religion and still sort of maintain this kind of state of humble ignorance and wonder, in the sense that there are people who find that following a particular spiritual outlook helps them in their seeking, but they still remain kind of reflective followers who are still open to learning more or to understanding more about the world. So to me then, at least, I would argue that sort of embracing this kind of state of humble ignorance is a somewhat meaningful spiritual goal in its own right, rather than subscribing rigidly to any particular view. And such openness towards many different perspectives brings with it 4 particular things or challenges or features maybe that I'd like to touch on. The first one is that it's empowering. Second, it places responsibility on individuals. Third, it demands an active and reflective mind. And fourth, it values intuition. And now I just want to go through these 4 points one by one. So first, openness to the world's wonders in this sort of state of humble ignorance is empowering because it puts emphasis on an individual person's spiritual outlook. So if I follow this kind of way of going about life, then it's within my own capacity to decide or to choose what I believe in and what I don't believe in, whether I believe in the existence of a God or not, but also what I believe is right or what is wrong. I can, of course, take cues from my environment about this, but nothing that I hear is inherently right or wrong, but rather, with this kind of outlook, it's up to me to make decisions about what I believe is right or what I believe is wrong. I'm empowered to make those decisions. So it's empowering. But second, such empowerment then comes with responsibility, and that responsibility might even feel quite heavy at times. So what's the right thing to do? If it's up to me to decide what's right and wrong, then I have to actively resolve ethical dilemmas which will invariably arise. I can't just resolve such dilemmas by following the teachings or the dogma of somebody else, because if I believe that nothing is inherently right or wrong, I'm empowered, but at the same time I will heavily feel this kind of responsibility. That said, of course, somebody else's agenda can be used for guidance, and I'll get back to that one in a moment. Third, it follows then from this combination of empowerment and responsibility that it requires an active and reflective mind to kind of cope with this sort of being in a state of humble ignorance. So Erich Fromm pointed out at some point that activity in ancient Greek culture actually referred to a state of active contemplation, and it's this kind of activity that I think we could do with a little bit more of today, rather than the frantic sort of busyness that we often see as being active in our modern lives. So finally, the fourth point, if we acknowledge that our cognitive capacity is limited, then it still leaves open the question if there isn't some other kind of human capacity that we can perhaps draw on to make sense of the world and that can be fruitfully engaged and fostered. And to me the answer is yes, and that capacity is our intuitive rather than purely cognitive capacity. Intuition to me is our innate ability to understand things and know what's right and wrong, and it engages not only our cognition but also our emotions and our subconscious. So believing in active reflection and rejecting dogma leaves infinite options for how we lead one's lives, and that might be quite overwhelming even. So from a pragmatic perspective, where do we start? One thing that I find kind of a possibility, I suppose, is as a pragmatic solution to simply start with those messages that have come from wise women and men in the past, in terms of the kinds of things that other people have established that are principles that we probably won't go wrong with. As in, we have to start somewhere, even if we're open to changing our mind as we learn more about the world, we still have to start somewhere. And so a pragmatic approach would suggest that we start with these kinds of things that have consistently emerged from wise thinkers in the past. And those things, I think, are basically the active cultivation of love, care, and compassion, and I would argue not only towards other humans, but towards all other living beings. So from my perspective, starting with the active cultivation of love, care, and compassion together with active reflection and intuition, I think we sort of are on our way towards sort of spiritual development. It's a possible and worthwhile pursuit, I would argue, which can contribute both to inner as well as outer peace in the world. So to conclude then, what can we conclude about the desire to know the unknowable? I think we can simply lean back and relax about this. I would say there are things we'll never know, and from my personal perspective, such is life, and that's quite fine. But even without knowing, if we have love, intuition, and insights we get from sharing our experiences with other people, then I think we can use that to effectively guide us to become a better, more peaceful, and more content humanity. Thank you.